Hi, I get a lot of questions from students asking about how do I create and use functions in Python, and what are they good for, and how do I put all these pieces together? And functions are really basically something that you really need to know in Python. So let's go ahead and get started. Let's kind of talk about just a basic function. So let's write one right here. So what I want to do is when I start any kind of function, I want to use the prefix def or define, and I want to be able to put a function name after the def. So I can just write silly function, and I have to end it with parentheses and a semicolon. Now, what actually happens is everything that I might do after I put my define silly function parentheses and colon, anything that I put beneath that is going to actually be something that will happen when I call this function. So, for example, I can say print hello, I'm a silly function, right? So let me end those quotes and go from there. Now, if I wanted to call this function, right, and then I would just say silly function, end it with the parentheses, and then I would execute it. So here I'm going to go ahead and execute this, and you can see down below that now it says, hello, I'm a silly function. And all it did is say what was requested here at the bottom of this. So that's just a basic function. And you could add other stuff to this and say print, say hi to your mom for me. Right. And then I'll run it. And then, of course, it will execute it. And it'll say, hey, that's my silly function. All right. So let's kind of look at some other examples. A lot of times with functions, we actually want to do something with some data. And really, that's kind of the point of what we're dealing with here. So let's say that I wanted to create a function that will create email names. So I'm going to call this one an email creator, right? And in here, I'm going to take the first name of a person, and I'm going to put this inside of my function. Now, when I say this about the first name of the function or the first name of a person, I have to give it some kind of data value. And that's what's going to be in these parentheses. So like in the example above, in the silly function, I had nothing in the parentheses, so I'm not passing any data or any arguments per se. This time I want to pass first name. So I want to do something with that first name. I'm going to go ahead and print the first name. I'm going to basically use the same name that I have here. And then what I want to add to it is some text. It'll be like at email.com. We'll just say that. So let's say that is our basic email creator. So we could just call our function email creator and then put a name in there. We'll just put a rocket, and then we'll call our function. And you'll notice all that's happened is our function has taken the data here, using it inside the components beneath it or the scope of that particular function, and took it and added it to at email.com. So we can actually use this for other types of things. We can call it again and put in another one. And let's just say we want to use Gamora, and then we could also add some additional things to that particular function. So you kind of see how the functions can be used by passing data through them, how we create them, etc., etc. So let me let's go on to the next idea. Now, let's say that I wanted to do something. I'm going to take this email creator. I'm going to copy it. I'm just going to move it down here. And let's say that at default, I wanted the email name to be equal to at email.com, but also I wanted to create an email so that I would basically do something like this to say email. And by the way, let's just kind of run this so that way we know what's going on. And let's go ahead and just put rocket. Right, so you can see that this is actually setting a default value for this email variable that I'm throwing in there. And what will happen is that default value gets applied here inside of our print function. But what I can also do is this. inside my function, I could say that that my email is going to equal to at guardians.org. And let's just kind of see how by applying this when I call the function, it actually replaces what's up above here. And so that way, without it, it will go to the default. So, and you don't have to specify the argument when there's a default. But when you do specify it, like I have here, it will replace the default and then use it inside that email creator. So, we can have fun with that. We can do different things. So we can just say email creator, and we can use a different name here. We could say something like Nebula, and she is going to be at nowhere.me. And so now we have that different name. And of course, if we start back at the beginning and put a name in without any kind of definition, it automatically goes to the default here, which was specified here. So that is actually using functions with a default value. All right, let's kind of look at another example here. One of the things that we really want to use functions for is actually for returning values. And so here's a basic example. Like, let's say I want to create a function and I want to add two numbers. Okay. And let's give those numbers a variable X, and the second number would be Y, right? So what we would do is something very basic. We would say that the result that we want is going to be equal to X plus Y. And what we're going to do this time, we're going to add a new argument or a new term here. It's going to be the return term. Notice it turns green. That means it's part of Python's default language. And we want to just return the result. Okay, so now let's go ahead and add two numbers. And let's say that the number is 1 and 3. And let's run that, and you can see that we get the output 4. So that is pretty straightforward. Now, by the way, while we're on this conversation, we could also, since this has an output, we can also set that to a variable. We'll call it addition equals to that, right? And then we'll say print addition. And this is a way that we can store the output or the return result from a function into some kind of variable. All right. So we could do the same thing here. We could actually add two numbers. We can actually create this one. We want to actually say average two numbers. And the only difference here is that our result here would change, right? So we would just say X plus Y divided by 2, and we would get our result. So then our average would equal average two numbers. And we'll put two numbers. We'll put a 5 and a 5. And that average should be 5, right, when we're done. And we'll say print average, kind of keeping with the previous, and there we go. So we can obviously change these. What's the average between, let's say, 10 and 5, right? And that should be 7.5. And there we go. So now we have those kinds of options. All right. But also we can extend this out a little bit further and have fun. Let's say that we don't know how many numbers that we're going to put into our function. So we want to say define, we're just going to create add all numbers, right? And this time we're going to put a star and an X variable. And this indicates that we don't know how many arguments are going to actually be passed into this function. All right. So I'm going to construct this function in a way that will allow us to add all the numbers that would be added into this. So by the way, this actually creates this into like you could argue that this would be like a list. So I'm going to say that the sum is currently at 0. So for every number that is in X is what's in the asterisk X up above, we're going to say that the sum is going to be plus equal to whatever n is, right? And when this is done, we're going to return the sum. return underscore sum. And by the way, if you notice that when I use the word sum, it turns green, which means it's a protected word. So we're going to go ahead and say return sum. All right, so what this really means is that we can print the value that will be add all numbers, and we can add 1, 2, and 3. Let's just go with that, and that adds up to 6. Wow, that's fantastic. And let's say that we added some additional stuff to that. Let's just say 4 and 5. So now we have a function that will be able to add based on whatever number of numbers that we want to be able to put into it. And we can also then start to include our default values with this function. So let me kind of copy this, and I'm going to create a new function just below, and I'm going to call this math all numbers. All right. And we don't know how many numbers we're going to put in, but our math is going to be equal to sum. So that's going to be our default. So no matter how many numbers get put in, the default is going to be the sum. By the way, another alternative, right, would be that our other thing that we could do here is do an average. So in order to calculate an average, we also need a count value. So I'm going to create count value equal to 0. And then for every number in X, I'm going to say that sum is going to be equal plus or equal n. And now I'm going to say count is going to be plus equal to 1, which means that every time it runs through a number, it's going to count the number of numbers that's going to be there. So now I'm going to say if the math is equal to average, right, then we're going to return the sum divided by the count. If I could spell, that would be great. Otherwise, else, we're going to just return the sum, which actually we have right down here. So let me just kind of leave that in there. All right. So now let's see how this works. So we're going to print math all numbers, and we'll go 1, 6, 3, 5, 5. I think that should be good. All right. And so since I didn't specify anything, this should be all added up. So we're going to add all those numbers up, and that should equal to 20. So what's happening is that this part of our function is not being called. But now let's take this same thing and let's go ahead and add that the math is going to be equal to average, right? So now it replaces our default value, and boom, we can see that all those numbers, because we have 20 divided by 5, so that would be 4. So we can easily see that it averages out, and it's basically combining some of the arguments that we have here. So I showed you a real quick view of like how to use functions, how to create basic functions, and I hope this helps you out. Have a good day.